Iwami was recently released to the live servers, so today we're going to be reviewing the Tier 9 Japanese battleship and see if it's worth buying. We'll get straight in and look at the ship's stats. At Tier 9 there are now 4 Japanese battleships: Izumo, Musashi, Aizen, and now Iwami. At first glance you may think Iwami looks rather similar to Aizen, and you'd be right, but there are also some notable differences. We'll start off with the guns, and in terms of caliber they are pretty good, having the same 410mm ones as on Izumo or Aizen, which are good on those ships for different reasons. However, for Iwami that's not the case. The main issue that these guns face is quantity. There are 4 dual turrets, giving it the lowest number of main batteries of the 4, and because of that, Iwami suffers. It has the lowest DPM, whilst at the same time having the lower AP penetration values like Aizen, and to top things off, even with upgrades, massive dispersion, which can leave you feeling very annoyed at times when, let's say you've got a broadside target and you completely miss. Things aren't all bad however, as Iwami has the same firing angles as Aizen, which is 25 degrees. When you do get closer engagements or are just bow tanking, it's very easy to fire all 4 turrets at once, without really exposing your side. With this, although as I mentioned the dispersion is very high, Iwami does have a sigma of 2.1, so sometimes you'll get some of the crispest shell grouping ever, but that's all down to luck, and again, that's where the lack of guns seems to hinder this ship, as if it had the 12 that Aizen has, this wouldn't be such an issue. In terms of the secondaries, their stats are actually really good. The only notable issue they have is the lack of range, compared to Iwami's German counterparts. In total, there are 9 155 and 16 100mm guns, which allow for a base DPM of 350,000, which is surprising when you compare it to the likes of Pommern or Prinz Ruprecht. Building for secondaries is viable, however it's something that you would do more for fun rather than effectiveness, since your main guns will suffer in terms of accuracy and reload. However, to counter that you could try a hybrid build. As you can see on screen, this is what you get from Iwami's full secondary build, but as mentioned prior, the limiting factor is going to be range, as you can see on screen comparing that to Pommern and Prinz Ruprecht. This alone does bring into question the viability of a secondary build, but so far from my experience it's something that can work, but even with a standard or hybrid build, it appears that Iwami is much more suited to ranked battles opposed to randoms. For a secondary ship to work in randoms, although this still applies to ranked, you really need as much range as you can get, and for that reason alone, I'd say if you wanted to spend coal for a secondary brawler at tier 9, honestly go for Pommern instead, otherwise Prinz Ruprecht would be just as good, if not a better choice from the tech tree, plus both of them also have torpedoes. As we've just mentioned them, that's another feature Iwami possesses. However, torpedoes aren't the make or break for this ship, but more what I'd call a nice to have. In terms of firing angles, there's no other way of putting it other than they're terrible. Getting to a point where you can fire them, you're going to be showing an unforgivable amount of sides, so you need to be especially careful when using them. They're great to fire and forget at distance due to them having 20 kilometers of range. However, you can still utilize them in duels, either when the enemy has just fired or when you're at very close range. And because of that, again, this is why I think Iwami is just better suited for ranked battles due to how much closer you can get to people. Something that is very important for duels, or just getting shot at, is the armour. Again, there's a lot of similarities with both Aizen and Izumo, but overall the armour scheme is pretty good. Now the bow is 32mm, the armour belt's thick enough to bounce a lot of shots, and again it's very similar, 50mm of deck armour, and below that the casemate armour is actually thicker than Izumo's, so you're safe there too. The main areas of concern are the superstructure and the rear. In the back there are a lot of flat angles which will eat up a lot of shells, and at the same time there's a good amount of superstructure, and Iwami doesn't take that too well when coming under spam. But apart from those areas, the armour does seem to be pretty good. Finally, in terms of speed and manoeuvrability, Iwami isn't the worst. It's got a decent top speed of just over 28 knots, a surprising 880 meter turning circle, and a 14-second rudder shift. Although it's not the most nimble battleship ever, it's definitely not slow either. However, if you did want to add some speed, then you could certainly incorporate Brisk into your commander build. Speaking of builds, we'll quickly run through some now. A standard build for Iwami would be as follows. For the commander, your choice between gun feeder or preventative maintenance, grease the gears, adrenaline rush, concealment expert, emergency repair expert, fire prevention, and basics of survivability. As for the upgrades, you will want to go for main armaments 1, damage control 1, aiming systems 1, steering gears 1, concealment mod 1, and main battery mod 3. Moving on to build for secondaries, on the commander, again you'll want to go for either gun feeder or preventative maintenance. IFHE, since this will move your HE penetration from 30 to 37mm, which is great. Long range secondaries, manual secondaries, concealment expert, emergency repair expert, and adrenaline rush. As for the upgrades, you'll want to go for auxiliary mod 1, damage control 1, secondary battery mod 1, steering gears 1, concealment mod 1, and auxiliary armaments mod 2. However, if you wanted more of a hybrid build, then you could swap that out for main battery mod 3, but again, if you're going for a hybrid build, then it's really up to you for what you sort of want to switch and swap out, depending on what works best for you. With the builds covered, we'll head into a game where we can discuss and see the ship in action. We're playing on the map Shards in a purely tier 9 game, which on a side note is something I've noticed happening a lot more these days, making playing at tier 9 a bit more fun, and it's kind of needed, especially now you do have to face some of the super ships. Now, to make sure I give as honest a review and answer as possible as to whether this is worth buying or not, just to begin with, I did play about 50 games or so with a full gun build, since I'd already got Yamamoto trained for it, and I'll be totally honest, the full gun build was pretty dull and just really unenjoyable. There are occasions where you smack the living hell out of people, you manage to hit a few random torpedoes, or just have a generally great game like the one on screen, and I say this as we do manage to get a non-pen on the Lion. But with that much investment in the guns, the amount of times I was missing shots that should have been an easy citadel, or frankly even a hit, was just a bit too high. And at that point, I switched to a secondary build, started building that up, and oh my god, it is an entirely different experience, and after just probably 5 games in it, I was just like, I am in love with how this plays, and I have not looked back since. And I've got to say, a secondary build, but well, more of a hybrid build, because that's what seems to work better, at least in my experience, is much more enjoyable compared to going for a full gun build, which you still get some pretty poor performance, and we did manage to get 2 shots there, and that was quite badly aimed, so I'm not going to blame that on the guns. That's more effective an issue that I had. Now, for what we're doing at the moment, we are going to the top right side of the map, because with pretty much anything where you're playing in secondaries, and also we do have this Tulsa over here, which is sort of bow one, which is going to be a bit of an issue for us, but as you can see, there are quite a few islands around here, which is going to make life a lot easier for us, because when you're going in pretty much anything secondary, you want to get as close as you can, and it's a lot harder when you've got something spotting you and consistently shooting you. But whereas here we've got a bunch of islands, what we're able to do is just push on up, and we're able to sort of close the gap a lot easier because, well, nothing can really shoot us apart from this Tulsa. But I mean, we've got 410mm guns, the same ones that are on Izuma, but as I said before, the penetration is much lower, and especially at range it does get quite a bit worse, but we can overmatch 27mm of armour, so can still do a decent amount of damage to this Tulsa. Now, on that topic, that's sort of why on the slot 6 is, if you're going to invest in the guns, it's pretty much only worth going for the reload, because if you do go for the extra range, yeah, you can shoot a bit further, but for that you then get penalised with a much longer reload, and at the same time when you're going at those sort of ranges, you're just going to lose even more penetration values, which when you've got already inaccurate guns, it's just not going to be worth the investment. So I think for that one it's more effective instead go for the secondary upgrade if you want to go for a full secondary build, really ramp up the DPM, or if you wanted to go for more of a hybrid, which is what I'm using. You can see here we are chunking the living hell out of this Tulsa all the way down to 4000 HP, and then you're able to get around a 24-second reload time, which is quite nice. Now, I'll say as well with this, when I played this game, I think this was running actually a base secondary build as well. I think we had got maybe 13 commander points or something like that, so it was nowhere near fully invested, and we managed to get a result like this. And as I've been playing, building up that commander, I think now I've had probably about 20 games or so, it's quite consistently doing a lot more games like this, but you are still going to be at the mercy of the matchmaker as well as what map you're on, because if you've got some pretty open maps or something, then there's not as much you can do because you're going to just take health, well, you're going to lose a lot of health as you're trying to approach people, and by that point you can't really sustain the damage, and then you can't stay there to use your secondaries, and that's kind of why I do say I think Prince Rupert would be probably the best thing for secondaries, because it's just an overwhelmingly great ship, and unfortunately we do get the line shooting us here. They don't set a fire, but they do 9,000 damage, so at this point you're probably thinking, oh, you've only got one fire and it's nearly out and you're going to repair it. Well, because there's nothing else that can really shoot us at the moment, I thought I might as well save some of our HP. The Fletcher's too busy with the Schultz by the looks of it, so I thought, yeah, just repair that instead, and then we can just wait for that to come off cooldown and when we next engage something else. Now I do shoot this, and I can see that the engine of the Fletcher is knocked out there, so they're probably going to be going at half speed if they've got last stand, but yeah, I think I overestimated how fast they were going to be going there, so we did horribly miss, but at the moment we should be at a serious disadvantage at the moment, because we've lost 3 of our 4 destroyers, they've only lost 1, and at that point it's going to be very hard to really play this game if you're going to have destroyers going for you, but because of how badly the enemies have positioned themselves in this top right corner, it's making it a lot easier, because most of their HP and most of their guns pretty much are all in this one tiny area, which is going to make it a lot easier to do damage. Now I have just been spotted, and as you can see, this is proving sort of my point with the guns. Going in, get 1 citadel and an over penetration. That was a broadside target where we got only 25% of our shells hit there, so 2 of the 8 shells actually even hit the sort of flat side of an Iowa. I mean, thankfully we did get that 1 citadel, but otherwise 2 penetrations is incredibly poor, so that is the one issue with this ship. But of course we don't have the main battery upgrade, but at the same time as that, even with the upgrade, I think we still probably would have missed some of those, so that is the one issue with this ship. Now, it looks like the Iowa had actually disconnected or something there, so I did put some torpedoes in case, you know, if they stay disconnected, then we get some torpedo hits. If they reconnect, then it's, you know, might as well fire them anyway. But we are going to start focusing onto this FDG instead, because although the line is, you know, straight ahead of us, it is going to be more of an issue from this FDG, because they've got a pretty nice angle on our side, and we do manage to make the most of them pushing around that island and not angling, but they do get to return fire and do a pretty nice 7,000 damage on us. But you can see here how our secondaries are starting to just rip into this FDG. And even though they are healing at the moment, the damage is going to keep on going, and plus we're able to, well, we also just managed to get some hits onto that Iowa, managed to get a kill, and our guns reload at the perfect time. Even though they're healing, we've managed to get the double strike, so, I mean, it was a bit of a cheesy kill there because the guy disconnected, so it's not really too fair, but at the same time, I mean, it's quite nice to get that double strike. Now at this point the Iowa does have the line on their side, so the line needs to start turning into the Iowa, because otherwise they'll just take more damage, but at the same time they've also got me on their side, where you can see the amount of damage these secondaries are doing. You know, that's a couple of thousand each time that those are hitting. Also managed to get a nice chunk there, because the line is still showing a lot of side, so this is where the secondaries really come into their element, because, well, they're just able to do this, and the firing angles are also coming in incredibly useful here, because we're able to show, you know, not too much side, and as soon as they fire we can immediately start turning to our right. So there we go, I'm going to be nice and angled, so then if they do hit us, it's just going to bounce off our armor belt as it just did there. Managed to get that last kill there with a Citadel, up to 178k, so we just need to get one more for the Citadel, but so far this is generally the experience of Iwami, and so far I've really been quite enjoying it, but only with a secondary build. If it was the main gun build, I would just play something else, because it just really isn't fun. Honestly, I'd just play a Zuma, because better pen, more guns, and you've got, well, I mean, the frontal armor makes it quite easy to sort of tank in. Now, this breast over here does manage to knock out our, well, actually it was the Fletcher, sorry, get the Schultz, but at the same time this breast is now taking fire from quite a few different ships, which I do want to hit this because that will let us get the Kraken, but taking fire from the Iowa, the Tulsa, and the Johann de Witt, it's going to be quite hard to secure this kill, because with inaccurate guns not doing all too much damage, then we are going to have a bit of an issue. But I just keep on aiming towards them, and yeah, 16,000 HP left. I'm like, okay, might as well try and fire here, see if we can get some shots. already there down to 12,000, and this is where the fast reload does come in here. So you can already see we've got about 17 seconds left. Unfortunately, I only get overpens because that's more just the fact of I aimed incredibly badly there, but they're on 7,000. They are taking pretty monstrous damage. There we go. They're on 7. Well, still on 7k, but with all these other ships going for them, that's not going to last for too long. So I immediately try and fire as quickly as I can. Already, yep, 2,000 HP. They are thankfully healing. That's mitigating a bit of it. And at that point, we can just get that nice confirmation of the kill. 185k, and we get the Kraken Unleashed. And honestly, that's pretty much how this thing plays. Now, the only thing that's left is the enemy Noistashimi, which is on the other side of the map, and I do start loading up high explosive just a bit too slowly there, so I have skipped forward because we didn't manage to hit them, so the rest of the game would have just been us chasing them, but that really does bring us to the end of the game, so we will look at the results. So starting off, 185k, I mean, it's not the most crazy amount of damage for tier 9, but just more showcases how it plays, and it also just allowed me to explain how this plays. So managed to get 51 hits, managed to get 2 torpedo hits, 5 kills for the Kraken, and also got the double strike, 2 citadels, and only 100 secondary target hits there. If we move on to the team score, we did manage to come top of the team there with 2,000 base XP, so not the highest amount, but still quite nice there. And the enemy Noistashimi managed to get 1,200 on the loss, so fair enough for them, they played incredibly well. And if we move on to the detailed report, we can then see we did a pretty nice amount of damage, but a lot of that was thanks to the enemy Iowa. In terms of the secondary, so this is with, well, not a full secondary build since we didn't have all these skills there, but you can see there already we did 28,000, which isn't the most amount of damage really when you think about it, but if you are going against ships for longer durations and managing to get more hits, then you will find those damage numbers do bump up quite a bit, but overall a pretty decent result. Now, as I say, if you were thinking of buying this, it depends on what you've already got, I think, in my opinion. So if you have already got a bunch of other ships like Prince Ruprecht and you've got Pommern and you don't really want any other coal ships, then definitely go for this because I think it can be quite fun. But if this is going to be one of your first coal ships, I'd just say at least think about it for a while because there are definitely some better options there. So if you weren't too sure if you wanted something for full secondaries, try out the Prince Ruprecht first because at that point you can then test, do I like secondary brawlers? And if you do, then yeah, I guess the investment's worth it, but really I guess my recommendation is just it depends, which probably isn't what you wanted to hear, but it is what it is. Now, that does bring us to the end of the video, so if you did want to watch something else on Japanese battleships, I have got a sort of mini review on EC on screen now, but I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I'll see you in the next one.